All right, I would like to get a better sense of who we have in the room. So first, how many people are lawyers? Oh, one lawyer. All right, how many people are consultants? How many people work for a corporation? Awesome, okay. And now and I won't hold this against you. How many people know what Salesforce is? How many people have used Salesforce? Yes, all right, we're off to a good start. All right, so as Craig said, my name is Dominique Alepin. I am Senior Counsel of ESG Compliance at Salesforce. So basically, in terms of, I think giving you a better sense of what I do on a daily basis will give you a sense of the challenges that legal folks are facing internally. So I am the legal advisor to our Chief Impact Officer. So I advise on regulations and legal risk with respect to ESG. I also serve as part of our ESG Disclosure Steering Committee, which is responsible for the complete, accurate, and timely reporting at Salesforce. Salesforce issues 28 different ESG reports. That's what we did last year. Next year, we will issue 32 ESG reports. I am also the vice chair of the Human Rights Steering Committee, and I am part of the AI Acceleration Group for our legal department and ESG reporting. So, and again, I'd like to make this interactive. It's not often that you have a lawyer that's not going to charge you $1,000 to give advice. So I'm happy to take any questions as well. But what I thought that we would go through today is, so I was hired a year ago at Salesforce. I also held a similar role at Nike, really advising on regulation and reporting. And at the time, as many of you may know, Salesforce has been a leader in sustainability for over a decade. And what Salesforce faced about a year or so ago was a growing mountain of regulation, a sense that it wasn't tackling it in the most efficient manner, and so it needed to make hires in order to support that. So the hires that they made were myself, and then they hired 3 people in our ESG controllership department. So since that time, I feel like I came, and then all of a sudden everything started getting either pushed back. It was a very heavy start. And then all of a sudden, everything started getting rolled back, right? Like we started with the omnibus with CSRD and CSRD. Every day just feels like we are in this moment of a shift backwards. And what I'm here to tell you is, yes, that is true. And if you are running your ESG strategy based off of where regulation is going, man, that's going to be a difficult job for you to do for the next 10 years. So instead, what I thought I might give you some insight into is how we are managing that at Salesforce. So how we are taking into account that regulation is extremely volatile, and how to get back to the cornerstone of where you need to be from an ESG strategy. So this happens in every regulatory space. You have an initial thing that causes a creation of a lot of regulation. Then the people who are being affected by the regulation wake up, and they start advocating against that regulation, and then you get a bunch of backlash and a bunch of rollback. This has happened in every single, if you look at seat belts, if you look at privacy, if you look at every space goes through this amount of volatility. And I wish maybe a year ago we had been a little bit more thoughtful about that, because I feel that the arrival of a lot of regulation and mandatory reporting caused companies to go in the compliance direction, so that everything was now being driven by regulation. And that put a lot of companies in a really difficult spot for how to get out of this. How do we, now that we've said that regulation is the driver, what do we do now? What do we tell our board? What do we tell our C-suite about where we need to go next? And that is a challenge that we are also facing at Salesforce. Now that regulation is not going to be the primary driver of where we are going, how are we going to revitalize our program with different pillars? How many people are facing that problem right now? All right. If you have other ideas, you let me know too. This can be, all right. So I think another problem with regulation being the driver of ESG strategy is ESG reporting and regulation is driven at outputs, not outcomes. What do I mean by that? You are reporting data that is about specific things that you did. For example, if we take this to ethics and compliance, well, we trained 5,000 employees on ethics. It's not measuring whether those trainings actually worked, but it's just measuring the fact that we did them. And a lot of ESG reporting and strategy has become about outputs and not about outcomes. But if we shift to, the outcome of that was that ethics violations dropped 20% year over year. That's kind of where we want to get to. And so I think that where the shift needs to happen as we navigate through this regulatory volatility is we need to be thinking about what outcomes are we trying to achieve again. I think that there's been this shift back to outputs. We need to go back to outcomes. So this is something that I have put into my, talking with my manager about where I am trying to take my role, is I'm trying to make it so that regulation doesn't matter, that we create this ESG strategy and we're thinking about it in a way where compliance is really just the enabler. It's not the specific goal that we are shooting for. And by the way, now that I've tried for a year to predict where regulation is going, I'm also out of that game. So I'm not going to try to tell you what's going to happen with CSRD or CSRD. I will note one example of it shifting back is, so Spain actually this year in June passed a new reporting requirement. So Spain has a non-financial reporting requirement already, and they actually ended up augmenting it, and it was a result of serious fires that had happened in Spain and political pressure that was being put on the government in Spain with respect to how it is managing climate risk. So you will get these shifts back as more events happen. I think the problem is if you wait for those, you're not going to have a strategy that kind of is self-propelling. So the whole goal is to figure out where you're going and have those be supplements, not just be your drivers. Okay, so the way that I think about what we are building in order to manage volatility is risk management, platform for change, for positive change, and then a good ESG reporting strategy. So I think, working for Salesforce, it's a great match for me because if you know me, you know that I really care about this stuff. I really, really care about continuing to have a stable planet for my kids, for their kids, et cetera. So I'm really vested in that. And Salesforce itself believes that it is a platform for positive change. That mission, we always keep that as an underlying driver of building, what is the mission, what is the outcome that we are pointing towards. I think one addition, and that has been a focus of the company for a long time, the biggest addition is risk management. So really focusing on what types of programs are we building in order to manage the risk that both the impacts and the risk and opportunities that we have that are coming across. And then finally, the ESG reporting strategy. I'm going to talk a little bit about now that reporting is driving in a different direction. How do we think about what our voluntary reporting strategy is? I think a lot of companies, including Salesforce, were thinking about CSRD as being this overarching thing that was ultimately going to replace reporting. I don't think that is. We are now far from that having some sort of global reporting standard that governs them all. So we are now in the midst of shifting back and thinking about how do we have voluntary reporting with mandatory reports underneath them, as opposed to thinking about mandatory reporting with a little bit of voluntary reporting. We're kind of shifting in that respect. Okay, how many people did a double materiality assessment and have participated in that wonderful process? Yes. All right. So I will say it was an extremely painful process. I think, though, the results that it has achieved for the companies that have been through them have been really illuminating, because they have gotten companies that were we're trying to be everything to everyone to be like, no, what is actually material to your company? So if you haven't done a double materiality exercise, I really encourage it because it can be part of the foundation upon which you are going to build your risk management program, and that's how we at Salesforce are thinking about that. So so based off of those risks, we are now building a program in order to help to manage those based off of a strategy, based off of KPIs, based off of, right? I think that has been a really good filter for us. We just issued a report where we talked about how we manage water. Water was revealed to be a material impact and risk in our double materiality assessment, and we now have built a program with some targets around it as a result of that exercise. So that's our number one. Our number two is to really focus back on our values. I think that with the going back and forth, I think, and especially in this particular time where there is a lot of backlash against clean energy, I think it is tempting to also have the company go back and forth depending on where the tide is. I think the really smart companies are sticking to their values and know that the trust that you can build by sticking to your values is worth more than whatever happens in this particular time. So really focusing back and saying, okay, well, what are our values and what is going to last, not just today, but into the future? And that's where we're going back to too, about thinking about what are those values? There's a great book, if anyone is interested, there's a great book by Allison Taylor called, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget it. Higher Ground, yes. It's a great book. And she, in particular, talks about that consistency is what builds trust over time, not being a fair weather company to wherever the sentiment is going. Okay, then the final one, and the one that I spend the majority of my time focusing, is on going from a mandatory first strategy to a voluntary first strategy. So we are now in the process of looking at we issue a stakeholder impact report. We're now going back and thinking about, well, what does the voluntary report? I think anyone who's at a global company right now is looking at having to publish 10 plus local reports. So we'll do one in Australia, Spain, we do one in Mexico. We have all these different local reports that we are now having to create. And so what we need to focus on is for our stakeholders and for the people that are looking at Salesforce and are interested in transparency, what do we need to disclose to them? Because they're not going to get that information in those local reports. I think CSRD is probably going to go in that direction too. I think a lot of companies, just based off of where the scoping threshold was, thought that they would then do a global report. But given now how narrow it's become, I think a lot of companies will choose to do a local report, which means you have a gap in terms of what you're talking about from a global perspective. So we're back to focusing on, okay, what are our material risks, impacts, and opportunities? What do our stakeholders want to hear from us about those impacts, risks, and opportunities? And then what do we need to be then disclosing about them? What data do we need to capture, et cetera, and what outcomes are we shooting for in those specific areas? So we're back to not being regulation-driven or reporting standard-driven, but really being more introspective about how to be transparent with our stakeholders and giving them the information that they need. And then again, mandates are really becoming a subset of the data that we already understand. So we are actually looking at capturing more data than is required by the mandatory reporting standards, because that is important information that we need in order to build our ESG program. Okay, so in order, I think that's kind of from a strategic perspective. I also wanted to talk a little bit about like how we build governance in order to meet those 3 pillars. The first is, as I noted, right, like myself, a legal counsel had been hired, controllership has also enhanced its resources. So we're really focused on building cross-functional councils that help to break down silos and that can achieve both reporting and can achieve risk management. So as I noted, we have an ESG disclosures steering committee. They are responsible for the complete, accurate, consistent, and timely reports that we have to issue, both on a mandatory and a voluntary basis. We also, in terms of like risk strategy, we have a human rights steering committee. We are thinking about environmental steering committees, and we also have a day-to-day reporting team that is responsible for writing and reviewing reports. The other thing that we are really focused on, especially from an ESG reporting perspective, is the implementation of controls, especially around data, but then also around where information is being stored. That will help us to be a lot more efficient with the 28 reports that we issue. In particular, we're looking at training and defining roles and responsibilities. And then finally, a lot of you are familiar with the fact that Salesforce has a product called Net Zero Cloud for reporting. I want to talk about how amazing that is, because Salesforce has the shortest time period in which we close our financial year and then we issue an ESG report. It takes us only 4 months to issue an ESG report, and that's because we do a lot of work within Net Zero Cloud and putting the data there and having it ready to review. So it is very benefit. I will say, like, companies that are hoping to get really efficient with this, investing in a technology platform is really important to be able to achieve those efficiencies. And especially with AI, a lot of what we're looking for right here is AI. We cannot leverage AI without having good data management and having a good place to put it. So it's really worthwhile, if you want to get to being able to leverage AI really consistently, to be thinking about what technologies you're using. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about is something that I, in particular, am really proud of. Within this last year, Salesforce included its climate transition plan as part of its stakeholder impact report. And one of the things, I really truly believe that Salesforce is a leader in terms of how it thinks about how it is reporting information and being a leader, right? Like, one of the things that's unique about Salesforce is it doesn't just think about the impact that it is having within its value chain, but it also thinks about the impact that it has outside of that value chain. And so one of the things that we did, and happy to have other companies borrow this, or if you're a consultant to bring this use case up, is in our climate transition plan, we are very clear about the fact that we admit fully that we cannot solve the world's problems by ourselves. I think a lot of companies fell into this trap during the early 2020s, and it increases legal risk a lot, because then when the world fails to correct the problems, you're on the hook for saying that you can solve them. And the second thing is, it gives your stakeholders the information they need to know where the problems actually exist. So if you go to our report, you'll see in each page where we talk about our climate transition plan and where in particular we are working, we also have a specific section that is devoted to the key dependencies upon which that strategy relies. So we are really transparent about the change that's needed from governments, from our suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. So for people looking for a model on how to do this, Unilever also does it as well. So those are good examples. How am I doing on time? I mean, that's all I had. I'm happy to take other questions. I know it's not supposed to be Q&A, but. Okay. Questions? Yes?
Hi, thank you. That was really helpful information. Curious, because you said you did the DMA, you have your impact
Yeah, I mean, so that's a great question. So, and that's why, it's great to look at what's material to the company, but we're also looking at what questions do we get from customers and stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, we will include information that we will figure out, right? Like if customers are repeatedly asking for specific questions, we will find a place to put it. We are looking at whether that goes into a stakeholder impact report, because I think that's one of the problems in reviewing impact reports, is I'm not sure it's clear to every stakeholder that reviews it what is actually material to your company and what is not. Like, why is it going into a stakeholder impact report if it's not material? So that's something that we continue to evaluate as well. Like human rights reporting is another thing. We're not a manufacturer, so it's not from a mandatory perspective, it's not material to the company, but we still do it because we're being driven to do it by regulation. Does it then go into a stakeholder impact report, or do we rely on the fact that we continue to do mandatory reporting for stakeholders to find the information in those reports? So I think it's good to think about what is the totality of information that you need to report, and then where does it go into a blog post? What is the purpose of the various different reporting and disclosures that you're doing across the board? Where does it make sense to put all those things? Yeah.
I'm curious, Dominique, what is your toughest challenge today when it comes to sticking with values and honesty as a shield? I mean, what is a real day-to-day challenge that you face internally at Salesforce?
I think it's just important to continue to step back, right? That's where, if you look at history, that's where when I come through with other regulatory areas have been through these shifts, right? There is this upsurge, then there is backlash, and then we get back to a place. Just having that perspective in mind that whatever it feels is salient for today is not going to be what it is in 5 years from now. So we just really need to be focused on where does it make sense to land that will be able to be consistent throughout time. I think that is the biggest, because it's easy to get locked into this world that we face and not realize to level up and be okay, let's think about where we want to be 5 years from now. Yeah.
I really like the part you talked about moving away from a output-focused orientation to more of an outcome-based action platform of some kind. So when you look at outcomes for Salesforce, what are some of the pillars would you say that are driving the importance of outcomes? That is so important, taking into account your governance model that you have, and taking into account what is coming out of your double materiality, and how you see that from a risk opportunity challenge perspective.
Yeah, so I think that Salesforce we're still in this process of figuring out what those are. I will say one of the things, so I was at Nike before this, one of the things that I underappreciated about Nike was that it did that target setting, I didn't understand it at the time, but they did these 5-year target resetting process. They were focused on where are we going to be each 5 years for every single risk area or impact area that they faced. And it wasn't being driven by a regulation. It was literally, they're just these programs need, and I think it's also because Nike has a different risk profile than a Salesforce, right? So they were really driven at where do we want these programs to go? What does 5 years look for us? And so I encourage that as well as thinking about where every risk area, everyone who owns a risk area, where do you want to be in 5? What's your KPI? Where are these programs going? I'm not sure that we've gotten to that respect across the board. Certainly CSRD reporting is pushing in that direction, right? Because CSRD reporting is impacts, risk, opportunities, actions, and then your targets. So it's pushing people to start thinking about that. I don't know that we've gotten there for every single risk area. Yeah.
I was curious, your thoughts, if Salesforce could expand their sustainability budget by 20%, where would you see those investments going?
It's so funny because my answer would have been different a year ago than it is today.
Hire more staff?
Well, hire what type of staff would have been the question, right? A year ago, I would have said, like, I need 3 other legal people. And now today, I do think we're back at a point where we're thinking about, like, risk management, values, right? Like, people thinking strategically about that. I also think how to manage the fact that we've gone back into this local reporting, which is, I will say, like a lot more burdensome than trying to issue one global report. And so I think some resources in there on how to build like a more efficient local reporting strategy that would be useful too. All right, well, come see me during the breaks. Happy to chat. Thanks again.